often on the weekend we have such good things going on, and we just get to chat about that more. But we are glad that you are here. If you are used to morning coffees, I think it was said last week, it's a little weird because in morning coffees we see the chat and we're able to respond and all of that. On this, we don't. It's more a conversation that we all get to kind of just lean in as if you were here sitting on my porch with me, or like the other guys, you getting to sit in a room. So we're excited. We're leaning in tonight. We have Owen with us, Mr. Wildman, who is another anchor, been on this thing a whole bunch. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, John. Good to see you. I like to see those plants behind you.
Yeah, they're looking good, huh? I had nothing to do with them, man. Nothing to do with them. They're there. And I don't even know if they're real. That's how little I had to do with them. I'm assuming they're real, but I have no idea.
Look good.
We're just mixing it up. We're on the porch tonight. So, it's a nice night out.
I love it.
And you guys, if you saw the weekend, you got to see Chad Robichaux. You got to see him speak. We are so grateful. If you missed the weekend, by the way, you need to go back and watch it. It was phenomenal. The message that Chad brought was just so inspirational and so right on especially for the season we're in, where there's just broken people all around, and just recognizing that we're broken and we get to lead people through our brokenness. And that God actually uses our brokenness to help people get out of valleys, that as we go through the valley, people get to follow. And there's an amazing story on the weekend. I'm not going to spoil it for you. Got to go back and check it out. But yeah, Chad got to share. If you don't know who Chad is, he's one of Heights' own. Him and his family have camped in. They're part of the Heights family. They have phenomenal ministry called Mighty Oaks, which Chad speaks all over and is recognized that way. He's an author. He is a founder of an organization. I mean, just you name it, this guy has done it. MMA champion, recon Marine. I mean, the list. I'm sitting here going, man, what I do with my life? What is going on? I got plants. So, but yeah, Chad, how are you, my friend? We are so stoked to have you on with us. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well, and really enjoyed doing the message last week. And I'm so thankful that you and the rest of your pastor staff for giving me the opportunity to just pour into the church family. So, Kathy and I are so blessed to be part of the family, and just happy to participate.
So Chad, I know that John has like a whole list of really deep searching questions for you, but there's a couple other things we got to get to real quick. So the first one is we got to talk about breakfast a little bit, because last week, a couple weeks ago, John and I got into a very long conversation here on Midweek about English breakfast versus American breakfast. So first of all, do you know the difference between an English breakfast and an American breakfast?
Yeah, food. Like I've spent a lot of time in Europe, and been to London and been to Paris and all those the European area, and the amount of food, not of pastries. I tell you, there's nothing better than going to the Paris subway. You walk in and the wind is coming through the subway, and you get hit with those pastries.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
But you guys don't have any meat. Like there's no meat, no food, and
there's also
coffees are small.
Yeah.
Yeah. Coffee's terrible.
This week. There's also this whole thing about they do like baked beans for breakfast. This is how we landed it. I just wanted to know your thoughts on, is baked beans like a really good breakfast food, or should we pass on that?
Yeah, I'd pass on baked beans.
Oh man, it's so funny.
Oh, no. Yeah, John's just standing tall on those baked beans. I'm like, no, I don't think so.
Bro, you can't knock it till you've had the Heinz baked beans. It can't just be any baked beans. Like your campfire baked beans, you can't throw those on breakfast. That just does not work. But Heinz baked beans, they're a little bit sweeter. Get some brown sauce with it. Get some bacon, like real bacon that's thick, more like a ham, and you're gold, man. You're gold.
I hadn't tried it, so I can't knock it.
That was a very diplomatic answer, Chad. I feel like you could probably come out a little stronger over on my side, but that's okay. Okay, so one last question about breakfast. So you've been around a lot of places, spent a lot of time in a lot of places. Pictures on your wall back behind you show some of those places you've been. Where's breakfast game strongest? Apart from the state, I feel like States American breakfast is hard to beat, but where else would you get a good breakfast in this world, man?
Oh gosh. I'm not a big breakfast person to begin with, but I would say like the food in Italy has always been. I just love food in Italy. All meals, just breakfast, good pastries and eggs for breakfast in Italy. Yeah, I'd say Italy. Italy's by far like my favorite place to eat.
Coffee game on point for Italy, for sure.
No, I don't think they have the best. We have the best coffee.
Ooh. All right.
You heard it here. You heard it here.
Okay, hot breakfast takes. Okay, now that I've hijacked midweek.
No, you know what? Cuba.
Cuba. Okay.
I like Cuban coffee.
Yes, very strong.
I don't think I've ever had Cuban coffee.
Oh, you gotta get Cuban. If you ever go to Miami or South Florida, get some Cuban coffee.
All right, I'm gonna hit it up for sure.
It's tiny and it's strong. Good stuff.
So Chad, diving into, I would love to spend some time just kind of your story. You hinted at it this weekend. I've heard it in detail in different spaces, but you want to just take, I don't know, a couple minutes, kind of lay out your overall story, and then maybe we'll dive into a couple of parts if that works.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a 3rd-generation Marine Corps family, so something my family's super proud of. My Hunter, who lives here now, Hunter has our oldest son. He's working from Oaks. He lives here in Prescott. And he's when we get back to the church, you guys will see him at the church. And to all the young ladies, he is single. We have a single son, but he's a Marine. He's our 3rd-generation Marine, and my father was a Marine in Vietnam. So that's kind of where it started for our family. My father came back from Vietnam. He was an infantry Marine. He's seen a lot of combat. He came home. It was I don't know if he was ever diagnosed with PTSD, but he certainly suffered, just like many of our warriors today. He is angry. He was frustrated. He turned to alcohol and women, drugs, and very physically abusive childhood for me. I don't mean spankings with belts. I mean like fist to face physical abuse from my father. And I had a brother who's a year older than me. And when I was 14 and he was 15, he was shot and killed. So my early life really started off with a lot of hardship. Growing up in that kind of dysfunctional home, losing my brother was the closest person to me, because when you grow up in a dysfunctional home like that, the siblings get really close. And so when he died, I went in a very deep depression. My father left, abandoned the situation. My mother lost her mind. And so by 15 years old, I was living on my own. And so the Marine Corps for me was 2 things. One, it was a childhood dream. I'd always wanted to go in the military. My brother and I talked about doing it to escape the lifestyle. I had a really strong interest in special operations. I grew up in southern Louisiana, so loved to swim, loved the water. The idea of like scuba diving and jumping out of airplanes were like really appealed to me. And the reason I picked the Marines is because my father, despite all of his dysfunction, like the one thing that I always seen him so proud of was the fact that he was a United States Marine. Like every time something about the Marines came up, it was like this, like the one light that he had inside of him. And so that made me realize that the Marines had something that I probably wanted. And so that was one reason going in the military. The second reason going in the military for me was as a brand new chance at life. I was 17 years old. I wasn't going to graduate high school. I was working. I was roofing, running, swimming, preparing for the military. I didn't have any discipline or I didn't have any external discipline in my life, any structure or parenting. And so I went to the Marine Corps recruiter and I asked him to help me out, and he got me in the Marine Corps. So that began, with a process that radically changed my life. And within the first year in the Marine Corps, I tried out for reconnaissance, which is very tough to get into, 80% attrition rate. And that young I was very fortunate to make it through. And I think I just didn't know better. Like, I didn't know that I could fail or quit. I just was like, I'm like, why would you quit? Like, this is like, we're getting paid to do this. It's fun. So I finished and made it through and spent the next 10 years just training and learning how to do that job and wanting to do my job in combat. And unfortunately, that came at the cost of 9/11. I remember when those planes flew into World Trade Center buildings, like knowing I was at 3rd Force Recon Company at the time, I knew like my life was going to be different. And after that time, I didn't deploy right away. Got on with the Federal Air Marshals for 2 years, waiting to deploy. I was just shifted to the reserves. And and the opportunity came out to try out what's called the JSOC Task Force, the Joint Special Operations Command Task Force, which is the top tier of special operations in special operations community. And I was actually kind of young to, even though I had 10 years in, to make it to that unit. I was probably young and had a little low end of experience to make it there, but I was accepted and put on that task force, and I got exactly what I asked for. I did 8 deployments to Afghanistan, I got to do the job. Despite all the hardships I had, I would never ever trade that opportunity for anything in the world. I love the fact that I got to serve, in that capacity at that high level, to work with the most incredible special operators in the United States military. The most amazing Americans who have signed up for those jobs. I got to go out and operate that way, to work with those guys and work with people like that. It's like one of the pinnacles of my life to be able to do that. So I would never regret what I got to do, but it did come with a tremendous amount of hardship on me and my family and the people that are around me. I became a very angry and frustrated person just because of the things I seen and did over there. And it's very hard to do the job I was doing, operating at that level, and then come home and be like a husband and father. So it was like, I was very angry, very frustrated, lots of verbal abuse to my family. So that eventually manifested in physiological symptoms, numbness in my limbs and face, and throat swelling shut, panic attacks. And I didn't get the help that I needed. I just pushed it down because I didn't want to admit weakness or ask for help and get pushed out of my job. And eventually the wheels flew off for me. Over
Wow.
I lost 12 friends. One being Foster Harrington, who I wear this bracelet. You've ever seen with this bracelet? Foster was we served together for 10 years, and he served my wedding. We tried out for recon together. We were like very close. We followed each other in units, and he was killed during my first deployment. He was shot a single round through the head and died instantly. And, so it began me being very angry about that. And then I had one of my team members die midway through. And then during the end, I had 10 of my team members killed at one time. And these guys are not U.S. service members; they're Afghans, which may not seem as big of a deal to other people, but to me, these are my brothers. Like, I lived in their homes, I ate dinner with their families, I played soccer with their kids. They would have died for me, and I would have died for them. They were part of my team. And they worked for me, and I was responsible for them. And when they were all killed, if I was hanging on by a thread at that moment, that thread was broken, and the wheels totally flew off. I had completely melted down at that point. I was having such bad panic attacks that I was having what's called disassociation, to where you actually feel like you're almost like you're playing a video game, like bird's eye view of yourself during intense moments, and like I would be in those situations, and there was a moment that I was out for like 2 weeks, and it was like I woke up out of a dream, and I realized that I was putting other people in danger, not just myself. And so I came home, was diagnosed with PTSD, and that began kind of a split trajectory in my life. And by the way, like when I say I was diagnosed with PTSD, like I think it's important to like talk about like how bad I was. All like people say all the time about having panic attacks. You hear people say like, I was in traffic the other day and I had a panic attack. Like, nothing against those people that say that, but there's a certain level of panic attack. When I say I was having panic attacks, it's like you were like, if I was handcuffed to the bottom of the swimming pool and you're drowning, and like how desperate would you be for like one breath of air? Like, you're drowning. You would do anything just to get a breath of air. You're in complete despair and panic, but you never die. You're that way like 24/7. And that's the level of panic that I was in. You just feel like you need to escape and you can't escape. That's why a lot of people, when we talk about veteran suicide, a lot of people talk about like they feel like they're on top of a burning building and they don't want to kill themselves, but they have to jump because it's just too much. And that's the level of panic I was in. And on top of that, I was just completely ashamed because I was doing this job that, I never could imagine I would have the opportunity to make it in the Marine Corps and in the recon and in force recon and then JSOC and get given this opportunity to do this incredible mission that I was part of. And essentially what I believed was to fail, to fall apart and not be able to finish my job. And so I was completely ashamed amongst most of my peers, people that are really respected. And I felt like I let our country down. It's probably hard for a lot of people to grasp that, but I really felt like I let our country down because of the level that I was operating at. And so my sense of patriotism was just the level of shame, like a shadow of shame put over it. And that's when like I said, my life had this like kind of dual trajectory. One is I dove into martial arts, which is something I did my whole life since I was 5 years old. So I just put all my energy into that, which is martial arts is a good thing. It's a good place to put your energy to instead of like climbing to alcohol or drugs or anything, something like that, like my dad did. But you could have something that's good for you, like a medicine for being sick, and you could abuse that medicine. And that's what I did with this. I never got better. I just spent every waking hour doing that. So of course, spending every waking hour doing that, I'm going to be successful. I had a successful business, 1,000 students. I won an MMA world title. I amassed an 18-2 professional record. At one time, my fight matrix, I was ranked number 6 in the world. So on the surface of that trajectory of success looked good, but this other trajectory of like personal failure was, I was successful in this professional life, but my personal life was just going down and going down fast. My wife and I, that were just in our marriage was in turmoil. We were fighting constantly. I was a tyrant to live with. I was so frustrated, so angry, like anything would set me off. I was just so hair trigger, like mad. Yeah. I remember like my daughter, I think I said this when I spoke at the Heights the first time, told the story of my daughter who was so excited for her birthday, and I flipped out and grabbed my little girl's birthday cake. She didn't like the icing on her cake, and I just flipped out and grabbed her birthday cake and picked it up and threw it against the wall and destroyed my little girl's birthday. And just realizing that I was like just totally out of control. And just my behavior was out of control. So I just isolated myself from them. My wife and I's marriage just drifted apart. Obviously, when you're an athlete and you're fighting on television and stuff, I'm not a very handsome guy. I'm 5'3". I have big cauliflower ears and always get black eyes but there's always a lot of women around. And being in this marriage that was falling apart, it didn't take long for me to venture outside of my marriage and end up in an affair. It was just, I didn't really care about how it affected my family at the time. I had no empathy at all. Like my emotion was just gone and never came back from Afghanistan. I never allowed it to come back. And so when my wife found out, we separated. We sold our home. She filed for divorce. We moved into 2 separate apartments. And during that time that we were in these separate apartments, my wife, she made a really wise decision. She didn't want to be around people that would tell her like, your husband's a jerk. Like she wanted to be around a positive environment. And so she went into this church. We were going to a really big church at the time. I won't say the name of it, but we were going to this really big church. The reason I won't say the name of it because we just wasn't personally connected there. It probably wasn't our fault. It probably wasn't the church's fault. It was our fault for not being connected there.
Yeah.
We wanted to go to a smaller church. That way she could feel a more personal connection. And she went to a church in Texas called Woods Edge. And she just really got connected with the right people that helped walk her through it. They never put me down. They were for our marriage, even when I had filed for divorce, and really encouraged her.
Wow.
She began to pray for me. You asked, because I asked, how can you pray for me when I was unfaithful to you, like treating you the way I was treating her, like having harmed our kids the way I harmed our kids. Like, how could you be praying for me? And she said she would just pray, God, let me see Chad the way you see Chad. Let me love Chad the way you love Chad. Let me forgive Chad. So she was like praying for me this way. And meanwhile, single apartment, like bachelor pad, mom's gone, like party time. Like that was my mentality. Like I don't have to deal with this woman anymore. I don't have to be responsible for anybody else anymore. I can have my time. No one really understood me anyway. Like that was my mentality. And I had this huge fight on Strikeforce on Showtime. Strikeforce was the organization, which at the time was the second biggest show in the world. And I fought this kid in Berkeley de Leon. And I remember like being so focused to this fight for like 3 months training while we were separated. And then I had this fight and I won by decision. I remember I was in the Toyota Center and 10,000 people in there. And they raised my hand for this decision and I win. And all these people were cheering. And I remember like while these people were cheering and my hands raised, I remember like it was almost like time kind of stopped. And I, in this moment of clarity, realizing that Kathy wasn't there. She had been in all my fights before, like always. Wow. And I was thinking like, it just felt wrong that she wasn't there. All this weight's off of this fight. And I'm thinking like, I just fought my butt off. Like this fight was like knockdown, drag out. Every round we knocked each other down. Out of 18 wins, I submitted 17 people. And this fight was a decision. It was like a Rocky type fight. I fought so hard for this win. and I won this fight and got another win on my record. But meanwhile, like my wife and children, you know, are going through this, and I'm not fighting for them. And that reality like led me to go home alone that night. And I was laying in my apartment, and this thought started going through my head, like all these people that I blamed, my father, people in the military, my wife, like I blamed all these people for all the problems that were going on in my life, but the common denominator was me. Like I was a problem. And when I came to that realization, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to fix things, this thought came over me that maybe my family is going to be sad without me here, but they're going to be better off. That they would be sad, but they'd be better off. And so I decided to take my life. And that same hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of 20 plus veterans every single day, and many more outside the veteran community, that maybe my family, my friends, my loved ones are going to be sad without me, but the world's going to be better off without me. And I really believed that at that time. I had convinced myself of that lie. And I wasn't going to tell, like a lot of people, we see a lot of people at the ministry I do, they'll cry out for help. They'll say they're thinking about killing themselves. Like for me, when I decided to take my life, I wasn't going to tell anyone because I didn't want anyone to intervene. And so I would sit in my closet, and I had a Glock 22 pistol, and I put my family pictures on the floor. And I try to build up the courage to actually to pull the trigger. I mean, obviously I know what guns can do, and I know what would happen if I pull that trigger. So I try to build up the courage to do that, looking at my family's pictures and actually crying. And I pushed that pistol to my head. But every time I put that pistol to my head, this thought would come over me. And it was like an overwhelming thought would come over me of who was going to find me. Like I'd play it out like somebody's going to find me, right? If no one, eventually you'll start smelling them in an apartment, like somebody's going to come looking for you. And the only other person that had a key to my apartment was my son, Hunter. And I couldn't bear the thought of like him either finding me or him letting someone in and being part of that. And so that would be enough to pump the brakes. But the next day I was back trying to build myself up again. And there was one morning that my wife knocked on my door. I guess I don't remember the phone call, but I guess we had a phone call, and she said she thought I was in distress. So she came over, and she knocked on the door. When she knocked on the door, I was in the closet with that pistol, trying to build that up, and I was going to ignore the knock. I wasn't going to answer. And then she said something, in her voice, like, you know, when you're a kid, you hear your mom's voice and you know you're doing something wrong. You don't have to know what you're doing, but you just hear her voice. And that was like, I actually hid that. She was my apartment. She would never came in my closet. I hid that pistol under a blanket, which just to me expresses the level of shame that I probably had. And I answered the door, and we got in this argument. And during this argument, she asked me a question that, you know, is the reason I'm here today. She asked me how I could do everything I did in the Marine Corps. She saw me become a recon Marine, try out for all these things, these task force, go to these schools, train for MMA fights and lose weight, like all the discipline she's seen me put into my professional life. She's like, how could you do all of that, but when it comes to your family, you'll quit? And, you know, there's no more soul cutting word to me than to be called a quitter. So like that really cornered me and challenged me. And I knew the one thing I knew, I'm a pretty radical decision maker. That's just my personality. I'm either all in or all out. And so I'm like, she's right. Like I had been successful in professional things. When it came to the most important thing, being a husband, being a father, being a young 17-year-old kid that raised his hand and said, I'm going to do something important with his life. Like I quit on all those things, including my own will to live. So I made this radical decision in that moment that I was going to turn things around. And I even told her, you don't have to do anything. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to fix this. And I didn't know how, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. And I couldn't do it with the people I surrounded myself by, because I didn't have any accountability. I surrounded myself with people that told me everything I wanted to hear, not what I needed to hear, because of the position I was in as an athlete and school owner, and people just really just lifted me up. And so I knew I needed to go outside of that network, and I asked Kathy if there was someone in this church she was going to that could help hold me accountable to this decision that I made. And she introduced me to a guy named Steve Toth. And Steve was an MMA fighter. He wasn't a Marine or anything like that. He wasn't in the military. He was a small business owner who was the elder of the church, who just so happened to be on call when she called. And he met me at a Starbucks coffee shop. And I always say he wasn't those things, like super masculine things. But what he did have a gift that was exactly what I needed for me. He has ADD, like really bad. Like he has like no patience at all. Like literally, like if you go eat lunch with him, he doesn't walk to his car because it's a waste of time. He runs. He like runs from the restaurant to his car.
Wow.
At maximum. And he's like really bad ADD. And the reason that I say that it was such a gift for our situation is because I was so manipulative at that time in my life. I would have said all the right things. I wanted to use him to get my wife back. That's what I was trying to do. So I had written like this perfect, like 5-paragraph order plan of how I was going to fix my life. And I remember sitting down at Starbucks and I slid it over to him, probably like super smug, like, check this out. And he didn't even read it. He put his hand on it and slid it back over to me and told me I was going to fail. I remember being like so offended. Like, I'm like, who is this jerk? Like I put all this work into this thing. I'm thinking like, I gave you my time to meet you here, not the other way around. Right. Cause I'm just like super arrogant at the time. And I'm like, and you're not even going to read this thing. And he tapped on it. And I remember he put his finger and he like tapped on it. He's like, if this thing doesn't have anything to do with your relationship with God, I'm not going to waste your time and I'm not going to let you waste mine. And, you know, we have a saying at Mighty Oaks Foundation with our warriors: if what you're doing isn't working, then why not try something different? And everything I tried wasn't working. I had the pills. I had been through counseling. I'd been through all the programs. I had professional success, financial success, all these things. None of those things worked. It was time for me to try something different. And so I'll even say like I recklessly surrendered my life to Christ by his lead. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know why. I just knew that everything I tried didn't work. I was at rock bottom. Like, what do I have to lose? I had this conversation with Adam Carolla, the former host of the Man Show, on Monday, and just telling him on air, like it's really easy to give your life to Christ when you're at rock bottom, because I had nowhere else to go. But what happened after that was understanding who Christ was, understanding the decision I made. And that was through the leadership of Steve and the discipleship of Steve. And why it's so important to me is because when my brother died and I was 14 years old, a family took me to a church. And I remember they were just trying to love on me because I was so hurting. I was in a bad spot when my brother died. I was in really deep isolation. I remember this pastor like gave this incredible sermon. I don't remember what it was about, but I remember being so moved. At the end, he gave his Assembly of God church and he gave this altar call. And I'm like, that guy's talking to me. And I need to get up from my seat and go up there right now and give my life to Christ. And I did that at 14 years old. And I don't remember what the message was, but I remember I meant it. And I felt like all that pain I was feeling from my brother dying, I felt like it was all just gone in that moment. But there was no discipleship after that. There was nothing beyond that moment. And the world ate me up. And, and so I knew this time, the second round to give my life to Christ, that I had to have discipleship. And Steve mentored me for an entire year in biblical manhood. And what happened through that process, as I systematically calibrated my life to life in the way it was intended to be lived, I found just these miraculous changes in my life. I started finding restoration in my marriage, in my home, in my own brokenness. I found hope for the first time in a very long time. I found possibility for a future. And I ultimately found what I sought my whole life. And I think what we all seek our whole life, and it's purpose. And that purpose manifested for me in taking what Steve had given me, the discipleship Steve had given me, the grace that God had given me, and that my wife had given me and shown to me, taking all those things and how they impacted my life and brought me out of this darkness that I was in, to be able to beat these panic attacks and anxiety and depression, and the willingness to take my own life because I didn't want to live anymore. Like, to take all those things and see them restored in my life, I felt an obligation to go back and pay that forward by sharing that truth with others. I said this a lot, and I probably said this to the church last time I spoke. It was like if I was dying of cancer and Steve Toth gave me the cure, like I could not keep that to myself. Like, how could you keep something like that to yourself? You have to share it with others. And I felt the obligation and a deep, deep burden in my heart to share it with others. So Kathy and I made a decision, and I was sharing this with you. We were talking earlier. We made a decision through what we believed was just a really calling from God to walk away from everything we had in our life at the time, our stability and our security, the kind of like the comfort zone of that most of us have when we live in America, and the comfort zone and security, even though not all of us have great lives. We live in a pretty country. Most of us have some stability in our lives. We walked away from all of our stability to step on in the water and just know something was going to be under our feet, and fulfill that call God had in our life, just to be obedient to Him, not knowing what to do or how to do it, or especially not feel qualified to do it because we were bleeding ourselves. And we started Mighty Oaks Foundation, and have committed our lives since then to sharing what we discover with others. And it's been nothing more than that. Wow. Sit in a boardroom and say, wouldn't it be a great idea to start a nonprofit foundation? Well, no, it was totally the opposite. It was completely reckless, and God has been at the helm the whole time, just guiding the way and orchestrating this amazing thing that we get to be a part of.
So Chad, I know, man, your story is incredible, and it's just, I know you give glory to God for it, and we do too, man. I mean, it's just one of those things where you just evidence once again that God is at work in this world, man. So I know that, you know, Mighty Oaks, a lot of what you do has to do with, of course, with veterans and that are at that breaking point in their life. And so as I'm hearing your story, I'm thinking of two kinds of people that maybe real quick you can kind of give a little hope to. First might be someone who's nearing that rock bottom point like you found, or even really is rock bottom and doesn't recognize it yet. So what would you say to someone that's like, here's how you know it's time to change your life strategy and turn to God for a new strategy on how to live? What would you say to someone? How do they know it's time to do that?
Whether you're at rock bottom or not, I believe most of us struggle. Like I said, if people are at their lowest rock bottom or not, the thing about rock bottom is, you know, there's nowhere else to go. It becomes a pretty good place to rebuild your life from. But you know, if you could catch it before there, it's much better. You know, trust me.
No doubt.
But I mean, I think it's always comes down to purpose. Like we're all in our lives searching for purpose. Whether you go to church every weekend, whether you've been in church for 50 years, or you're not a Christian, it doesn't. You know, none of that matters. Like purpose seems to be like a hole inside of people that they're always trying to fill with something. You know, I remember like one time I was on this radio interview, and this was kind of like maybe 2 or 3 years into Mighty Oaks, and they read my bio, and I'm sitting on this radio interview, and the guy kept reading all these things that I did, and he was really trying to compliment me, and I wanted to crawl under the table while I was hearing these things. It's like this, it's like, you know, Federal Air Marshal, State Department, Recon, JSOC, like Medal of Valor, like all these different things. And he's reading it in the NBA, and like I'm like wanting to hide under the table. And at the end he goes, man, what do you? That's an incredible resume. How do you feel? Like, how do you feel when you hear somebody read that resume like that? I said, I said to me, it sounds like that I was so discontent in my life. Like it just sounds like such a discontent person. Like nothing was ever good enough. I was always trying to fill that hole of purpose. And I'm proud of the things I did, but a lot of my motivation wasn't always to be noble. And for others, it was a lot of times it was like, okay, I achieve this, what's next? I achieve this, what's next? I'm chasing this purpose. And so again, whether you're at rock bottom or not, I think there's this hole inside of us to find purpose. And as I go around and speak a lot, because clearly I found my purpose. And I think, and I'll say that complete with humility, I found my purpose. It's very clear to me what my purpose is. And I have no, I don't say it with any arrogance at all, because I'm just thankful and grateful to God that he's been able to show my purpose. But I speak to so many people that are even in ministry, and they're searching for their purpose still. They ask me, how can I find my purpose? And I think the answer is so clear. It's so clear. It's like too easy. It's not our purpose that we need to find, but God's purpose that we need to step into. You know, God didn't call us to fulfill our purpose in our life. He called us to fulfill his purpose. And when we step into his purpose and do the work that he created us to do, I can't remember the verse, and I'll find it. I'll go back and find it later, but I think it's in 2 Timothy, where it says he called us for his purpose. When we step into his purpose, that's when we actually find that hole filled in our life. We find fulfillment because we're living life the way we're intended to live. I mean, if we take things if we live our life out of context and don't use our life for the way it's intended to, it's not gonna work right. I mean, I could have a really high performance sports car like a Ferrari, and it works really well on a track. But if I go drive it on some of these back roads here in the back mountains of Granite Mountain and stuff like that, it's not gonna perform well. It's gonna fall apart. Well, that's most of us in our life. God created our life to be for a certain thing, and we're trying to do something that we're not supposed to do with it, and it doesn't perform, and it doesn't work right, and we wonder what's wrong. We're not living our lives the way we're intended to live them. And so I think as people search for purpose, as people search for hope, as people search to get out of their own brokenness, instead of dealing with like issues and dealing with problems in the past, if they could just step into God's purpose for humanity, not for their life, but God's purpose for humanity, for the reason he created us, I think all those things kind of solve itself. One of the things we do at Mighty Oaks, our methodology is really off of the reflection of what happened with me. You see, I was trying to, when it wasn't like I didn't want help or wasn't trying to get help when I was going through this downward spiral. I was trying to, but I was looking at the incidents in my past and trying to fix those incidents in my past. And when I stepped into the purpose and life that God had for me, one day I realized that all those things that happened to me in my past, my brother dying, that physical abuse in my childhood, like the hard things that I did in the Marine Corps, losing Foster Harrington, like all these bad things that happened to me, those things didn't lead me to my closet with my pistol in my hand. What led me there were choices I made in response to those things. You know, as cliche as it might sound, I didn't have to let my past define my future. And so a lot of times we try to look at our life and the brokenness of our life, and it's like, let's go back and fix that. How can I overcome this? Can I get a counselor to help me with this? Can I get some medication to help me numb this pain? Instead of dealing with the past, lean forward to the future. Paul said it. He said, I have to let go of the past so I can strain forward to what lies ahead. And man, you talk about somebody that had some trauma in their life. Look at Paul. He's beaten, shipwrecked, bit by a snake, like all these things that totally disqualified from ministry because of because he was Saul before he was Paul, and not accepted. And I mean, he was not accepted by anybody, by his enemies or his peers in the beginning, and all these things that happened to him. He said, I got to let go of the past so I could grab hold of the future and what lies ahead of me. And I think that's what a lot of times we talk about, like counseling veterans with combat trauma. There's when you if a veteran go to the VA, not talking about spiritual counseling or biblical counseling, if they go to the clinical counseling, they're get given two options. And about 99% of is one option, and the other 1% is the other option. 99% of the clinicians in the VA will do cognitive therapy. And cognitive therapy is terrible, I believe, for counseling people. It helps some people, but in most cases it doesn't, because it looks at one incident and says, let's look at this incident. Let's focus on this incident. Let's figure out how to solve this incident. Why did it happen? Who's at fault? Who can we blame? Let's blame the world around you. Never take responsibility. There's a second one, and there's only a few counselors in the VA that does this, and it's called prolonged exposure. And prolonged exposure says, let's look at everything that happened to you, and let's figure out how we can move forward past that. What's ahead? How are you going to react to that moving forward? And that's not even from a spiritual perspective. We use that same methodology at Mighty Oaks, where we say to our veterans, yeah, all these things happen to you, but let's look at how God says you could calibrate your life to living forward, moving ahead, moving to his purpose, and actually have a purpose in life. And we see people do that, again, whether they're at rock bottom or they're wherever in life. When we see people do that and step into God's purpose and they start seeing the fruit of that, they feel that fulfillment, and that fulfillment overshadows, in a good way, overshadows all the pain of the past. And I've got to see that firsthand in so many thousands of guys' lives beyond my own through the work that we do.
That's awesome. And I guess I'm kind of similar question, but slightly different. Chad, for somebody who's sitting out there and they've got someone who is struggling with PTSD, and they need to get that person help, how can they go? Like, what's some advice you have for them in navigating that journey? And then also coupled that with, obviously, Mighty Oaks, what you guys are doing is unheard of, really, in this space. My understanding is, from the journey God's got you on with influence in the White House and those spaces, it really is, even the experts are looking at you guys who seemingly have their plans in place going, ours aren't working. The results that you guys are seeing are night and day different and making a difference. And they're even looking at you guys going, how do we partner? How do we figure out? But so the question being then, if I've got somebody who, let's say it's a family member or a friend, or, in our case, somebody who's at church, how do we help them step in and get help? And then the other piece to that being, I'm sure there's a ton of people that want to partner with you and Mighty Oaks and kind of link arms that way. Is there a way that they can do that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll answer the last part first. Mighty Oaks is totally free. We even pay for travel. We pay for active duty, veterans, spouses, and first responders. So that off the table. Mighty Oaks programs.org. Do the application online, and someone will get back to you within 2 days. We run 30 camps a year, and they're totally free. And we'll fly you to one of one of our ranches, one of our 4 ranches around the country. So that first, and that goes to, and I'll take back to your first question is, what do you do if someone that needs help? Whether it's a veteran that needs Mighty Oaks or someone else, if you're going to approach someone with a problem, you should have a solution to point them to. So a lot of times people address issues and they, hey, you're struggling with this, you have this problem, and they don't have an answer for them. So if you're going to bring a problem to someone, you should have a place to point them to. Now, for veterans in a church in Heights, just knowing what I just said, you have a place to point them to at Mighty Oaks.
Yeah.
So that kind of solves that. Look, when you try to help someone in a place of hopelessness and brokenness, it's a very difficult thing. We talked about this in the message on Sunday. And again, if you didn't see it, please go back and watch it because we talk about that. The Bible gives a great illustration of Luke 5 of 4 friends that helped their paralyzed friend and get him to Jesus. When you bring in someone, trying to lead someone to Christ, to a relationship with Christ, so that ultimately they can step into the purpose that God has for them, is going to be difficult. One of the first things we've seen in that story in Luke 5 was the person probably didn't want the help. And this is something, if it's not an obstacle, great, but it's probably going to be an obstacle to someone that has a really deep hurt and burden. They're going to have walls up. They're not going to want to hear you. They're going to feel, even maybe they tried help before and things feel hopeless to them if they're in a bad state. I'm kind of speaking about probably the worst case scenario. And so I think, and I believe this to be biblically true, and this is out of Revelations 4, I think, where it says, the devil wants to deceive us, but the way that God gives for us to overcome the devil is through the blood of the Lamb and through the power of our testimony, right? Through Christ and have a relationship with Christ and through the power of our testimony. And so I believe the power of our testimony is the way to lead people to Christ. And so a lot of times you might disqualify yourself and say, I can't really help this person because I'm not a combat veteran, or I hadn't been molested as a child, or I didn't lose my child to a drunk driver, whatever they're struggling with. You think, I can never help them. And I maybe don't have advice to them. But I can tell you from personal experience, the person that helped me, Steve Toth, who helped me, never had the same experiences I had. He had a great father, a great mother. He grew up in a great childhood. He grew up in a great home. He was successful his entire life. And he was a Christian from a young age, lived his whole life as a Christian. He never served in combat. He didn't have anything in common with me. But he was willing to be vulnerable. And his vulnerability and his demonstration of transparency and vulnerability allowed me to do that back. And so what I always say, before you sit down across from someone and say, tell me what you're dealing with. How can I help you? Tell me your story. Like, what are you struggling with? Don't do that. Sit down with them and say, hey, I don't know what you're going through. I couldn't even imagine what you're going through. But let me tell you about a time in my life where it was a dark time, where I struggled, where I fell on my face, where I felt hopeless, and demonstrate to them transparency and vulnerability at a raw level, a very personal level, and expose yourself to them. And I think when you do that, and you talk about that time and that point of hopelessness, Christ stepped into your life and rescued you. And I just did that with you guys. I just got done telling you guys at that time in my life that was dark and embarrassing, and I treated my family like garbage, and I'm ashamed of that and embarrassed about that. A time that I felt weak, and so weak that I almost shot myself in the head. But then God stepped in. When you sit down across from someone and share your story with someone, something happens that a wall is broken. I think God Himself does it. Breaks this wall between people, and it opens up a portal for someone to step through. And the relationships built and trust is built, and you're able to walk them and then point them somewhere, point them to a place of hope, maybe beyond your capability, and actually lead them ultimately. Maybe God will use you to lead them to Christ, then maybe He just used you to plant that seed. And one of the things I always tell the guys we disciple as team leaders is it's kind of 3 phases that God uses to bring people to Christ. There's like planters and waterers and harvesters. And we rarely get to be all 3, or else we get the glory. So don't get frustrated if you never get to be part of that whole process. I tell that to our team all the time, because guys want to do all 3 when they're having the guys for a week. They want to plant the seed, they want to water the seed, and at the end of the week, they want to harvest the seed. But we don't always get to. Sometimes we get lucky and we get to water the seed, harvest it. But sometimes we're the planter and we're never going to see. And just understand, trust God has that process, and just you plant that seed and you just trust that God, and just pray for that person. and pray that God will bring someone in to water it, and someone later on will get to harvest that seed in life. So that's kind of my answer to that, is just transparency. Vulnerability is really the key and secret to success. Again, I believe out of Revelations where it says the blood of the Lamb and the power of our testimony is the kind of God's plan, the plan of salvation for the world.
You know, Chad, as we were chatting before we jumped on with everybody else, you said a line I think just sums everything you said up here in a few words. You said, broken people help broken people. And I can't help but wonder if whether you're in ministry or just a person who loves Jesus in this world, wanting to be what God uses to help other people, I can't help but wonder if one of the barriers is just us recognizing our own brokenness and stepping into it, and then being vulnerable to let other people see it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying. I don't know who it's quoted to, but it says, God doesn't call the qualified; He qualifies the called.
Yep.
And I think He qualifies all of us when we're willing and obedient to do the work that He's called us to do. And it's been just like a lot of people would probably look at our process at Mighty Oaks and think we're nuts to do it the way we do it. But it's the way God called us to do it, and it works. We take guys, all of our instructors at our program or alumni, they're guys who went through our program that we use. You don't have to be a combat veteran to go, but all of our instructors are combat veterans because we don't want them to be disqualified by the combat veterans. And so they're combat veterans who went, served, came home, fell on their face, but got back up again. And they might not have it figured out, but they're heading in the right direction. And so we start discipling those guys. We have about 28% sign up rate for guys that sign up for our leadership program, which is a discipleship program. We teach them over a couple of month period of how to pay it forward, just like I did and I'm doing. Over those guys, we have a biblical counselor at every session. We have a program mentor and a program facilitator, and it's a guy that manages the whole thing. But the guys that are in teams, the guys that are teaching classes, running the small groups, those are guys who just graduated the program. And there's something very special about that, because you got a guy who's at rock bottom, maybe just tried to kill himself the week before, and he stands in a room. He's not looking at a pastor saying, I can never get there. That's too far away. He's looking at a guy that's like 2 months ahead of him and saying, okay, I could get there. And then when he gets there, he looks at the guy a little bit further on the road and says, I could get there, and I could get to there. And then eventually, he could get to her, be a pastor or something, maybe if that's what he wants to do. But it's just putting someone that's their peer. We say we're a non-clinical, faith-based, peer-to-peer mentorship program. I think a lot of times people just say peer-to-peer, and they don't. It's not really peer-to-peer. We're really peer-to-peer. We have messed up people that are leading our program, and people would say they're not qualified, but they're still trying to move forward, but they know where they're going. They know the direction they're headed in. We have great supervision over the process, and something about that being just a few steps ahead of them really helps pull people out of those valleys that we talked about in the message, and they're able to relate in a way that's just really heartfelt, tangible, and it just, the process just works. And I really believe God called us to do the process this way, and we just see it in evidence of the fruit of it. I mean, we have 4,000 graduates. I've spoken to 150,000 in our resiliency program, these active duty troops around the world. We've had about 4,000 graduates from the Mighty Oaks Legacy program. And we deal with some very hard cases, like some serious cases. And we've only had one suicide. You got to think 22 a day. We deal with some of the highest risk groups. We've only had one suicide out of that. We have just incredible success stories. And some of our biggest success stories are the guys who go back. I was just telling you guys earlier about a guy named Joe Pyrus. Joe Pyrus, he attempted to kill himself in front of his wife. He looked at his wife in a hotel room, said goodbye to her, and jumped out of a 7-story window, missed the pavement by a foot, shattered his legs from his ankles to his hips. He tried. This wasn't like, I'm going to, take a few aspirins and a shot of whiskey and say I tried to kill myself. Like, he tried to kill himself, jumping out of a 7-story window. This is a Marine Master Gunnery Sergeant, 24 years in, 11 deployments to combat, like a solid guy who made a very determined decision to kill himself. And while I was in the hospital, one of our graduates went there and told him, you're going to Mighty Oaks, and his wife gave him an ultimatum. He came on crutches the week after he got out of the hospital. God gave his life to Christ and has been paying it forward ever since. I mean, he's one of our best team leaders.
Wow.
I could give you hundreds of stories like that. You know, and I think maybe 2 months after he came to our program, he was already teaching. I think this is also 2 months after he got out of the hospital from jumping out a 7-story window. You know, that's pretty raw and pretty fresh. And at that time, I could tell you, because I know him, he didn't have it all figured out yet, but he knew, he was very clear. We were very particular in our process. He is very clear in the direction he was going, and he was dead set on bringing other people with him. And we're going to embrace and support that.
So, man,
I love. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead,
No,
John.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, you know, as your church family, you know, I mean, we kind of have a backstage pass to what God's up to with Mighty Oaks in some ways. How can we, you know, I'm talking about we, like your church family, how can we hold you up, pray for you? I mean, I know that, I mean, we know, John and I both know, you know, as God entrusts ministry to you, there's a weight that comes with it. Even if you love it with every fiber of your being, it's also a burden. So I imagine you carry a lot, my friend. So what can we do to pray for you and stand with you?
I can tell you that, I mean, one, please be praying for me and my staff. We have 65 of the most amazing people in our staff, best full and part-time. We have incredible staff. Follow us on social media to know when those sessions are going, because those 30 sessions that we do every year are going. There's 2 going right now. There's 1 going in Ohio and 1 going in Montana. And you can imagine, if you've been a Christian for more than a minute, you can imagine the spiritual warfare that goes behind. I mean, that's saving souls. But these guys that come to our program, and I'm going to brag about our veterans a little bit, these guys are world changers. They're leaders. They're people who they're warriors. They're leaders, and they're going to go home to their communities, and they're going to change the world and build the kingdom of God. And the enemy knows that. And I know for a fact, from what I've seen firsthand, the devil hates Mighty Oaks and what we do. And every time there's one of these sessions, there's so much spiritual warfare that goes on. And so I just ask for the intercessory prayer of the church body of the Heights Church. You follow us on Facebook on Mighty Oaks programs. Our website's mightyoaksprograms.org. And when these sessions are going, just be in prayer. Like, don't stop, because every time we come, it could seem repetitive. Oh, they do another program over and over and over. Every time we do a program, it's another 20, 30, 40 guys, like souls, that their lives are going to be saved. Literally, your lives are going to be saved. Their families are going to be restored, and their eternity is going to be changed forever. And then their legacy will be changed. Who knows what they're going to do when they go back? So many of these guys have graduated the program, not just been team leaders for us, but they started their own ministries. I mean, we have a guy named Joe Mallis who came through our program, and I'm like, that guy didn't get anything out of the week. He's like just quiet, not doing anything. He started a ministry. Now he gets 4 trips a year, taking people to Israel, taking veterans to Israel. This is an incredible ministry. Like, he started, he was an atheist when he came to Mighty Oaks. Now he's leading. He's got his own ministry leading. I mean, so God, the enemy knows like the kind of people that we're ministering to. Again, leaders, warriors, world changers, and he will do anything to shut it down. And so be praying, and also be praying for, for me, John, to answer kind of John's question earlier, I didn't get to, was some of the things that I do. I'm working on a lot of legislation a lot of things in Washington, D.C. I've testified before Congress several times. I've advised the White House and the president's team on faith-based solutions to veterans care, and I've really been. It's hard work, and I do not like politics at all. But if we want to protect our religious liberties, if we want to be able to minister to people without government intrusion, then people from the church need to be involved in politics in Washington, D.C., fighting for our religious liberties and making sure that laws and legislations aren't made that'll stop us from doing what we're doing. And I can tell you a case in point, and I'm not getting political here. This is not my intent at all. And we talked about this before, John, but in 2001, President Bush signed an executive order to allow, it's called the Opportunity and Faith Initiative, to allow faith-based programs, nonprofits, which are called VSOs, Veteran Service Organizations, allow faith-based ones work with the VA and DOD. And those programs throughout the beginning of the war on terror thrived. And in 2009, President Obama signed an executive order to overturn that. And the people would, people that support President Obama wouldn't believe that's true, but he actually did. He signed an executive order to overturn that, and that eliminated faith-based programs in the VA and DoD. I know I was running Mighty Oaks under that administration, and it was very difficult to do faith programming with the DoD and VA because of that executive order. That program was unfunded, unstaffed, and it really hurt the veteran community. Between that executive order being signed in 2009 and the end of President Obama's term in 2016, the suicide rate went from 16 a day to 22 a day. And the reason it happened was we seen faith-based programs go away. They stood up 1,500 new clinical programs. Billions of taxpayers' dollars were spent, and the suicide rate went up. Why? Because they're trying to use a clinical solution to heal a soul wound. PTSD, combat trauma, suicide ideation, those are spiritual wounds. And a spiritual wound deserves a spiritual solution. And so there was really no representation of anyone fighting for those faith-based programs in Washington, D.C. And so I had an opportunity in 2016. The Family Research Council, General Boykin and Tony Perkins, they selected me as one of 6 veterans. They got to speak to candidate Trump to ask him any question. I could ask any question that I wanted. And so obviously that's a big opportunity. Future a candidate for president of the United States. At the time, he was already a Republican nominee. And so I really prayed about it, thought about it. I said, if I could ask any question, I want to know if he becomes president. And I asked him this question: if you become president, and this is a face-to-face conversation, if you become president of the United States, will you overturn this executive order? Will you allow faith-based programs to come back in the DoD and VA? And he said yes. And I took him at his word, and I was relentless because I'm pretty relentless when it comes to stuff like that. And he did. In 2018, President Trump signed an executive order to bring faith-based programs back into the VA and DoD, along with lots of other things, including funding. The only 2 areas that have been increased, the only 2 areas that have increased budgets in all the government entities are the VA and DoD. I don't know if you know that or not, but everything else, the budgets have been reduced in the government. The only 2 things with VA and DoD. And the VA one really put a lot of money into mental health care, bringing faith-based initiatives back in. I'm helping with the implementation of that. I did.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's incredible that to be able to see where that's at, and I will keep fighting to make sure those policies remain in place.
It's amazing, man. Well, we're out of time, but before we go, Chad, I just want to say thank you to you for first of all, for your service, the way you poured yourself out for the country, but in hearing your story, just a great expense it's been to you personally, but how God's now using that is like, thank you not only for your service prior, but now what you're doing is, man, it's unreal, my friend. I'm so appreciative of you. You're a hero for sure. You're a warrior. And we're just so grateful that you're doing what you're doing, and to call you Heights family and know you're a part of the family. Like, that's just extra special. That's like icing on the cake to the whole thing. And we're just so thankful, man.
Kathy and I think we're at church, and I mean, it's just a blessing to us. It's an encouragement to us, a refreshment to us to be part of we love our small group, and to be part of our small group, and to have that, it just really equips and encourages us to get out and do the work that we're doing. So.
Well, just know you guys are loved, and we're behind you. We're cheering you on, and I'm excited because we get to hear more from you in the future, I'm sure, and so that's super exciting for me. And along with that, I know, like, just church-wide, we have a lot of veterans, and just saying thank you to all of them. We don't say it often enough, and just we're super appreciative. And as a church, we stand with you. And if, like, I think if Owen was saying, if you're listening to this at any point and going, gosh, how do I get in touch with Chad, or how do I figure out, like, contact us. We'll help make connections and get you, whether it's help you need or resources or whatever with Mighty Oaks, we can figure all that out. But man, just so thankful in your time. I know when I texted you and said, hey, can you be on midweek? You were like, well, I'm going to LA Monday, Tuesday. I'm back Wednesday. So I know you're squeezing it in, and man, I so appreciate your time.
I love it, man. I would do anything for the church, and look forward to, I would love to get back and serve, get out there and continue to pour into the church. because it's our family. So love you guys.
Absolutely, man. Love you too. We'll have to do it again. Owen, my friend.
Thanks, Owen.
Any last words from you before we bail?
No, just echoing thanks to Chad, and I love that that thought of broken people help broken people. So as a church family, just hope everybody, you guys know that we love you like you are, and we think that God has a purpose for you that includes the scars and the healing that comes through those with God's help. So please don't try to be perfect. Just be you. Let God do his thing, and we're here to help. Love you guys.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you caught it because it's midweek and we connect it to the weekend, but without even saying it, Chad has lived what he preached this weekend, where, man, we have our testimony, we have our own brokenness, and all we can do is stand and go, this is where Jesus met me in that. And we point him to a hero. And so we're super grateful we get to do this, family. We will, as always, we have Morning Coffee Friday. We have, I just saw it. I don't know if you got the alert or not, but we have the worship on the lawn, where we're doing worship and message Thursday nights on the lawn at 6:30. You can join us for that. You can still sign up for that. So we would love that, to see you there. And then also Friday morning, we got morning coffee. And then weekend, we have services 10:30 and 6. So can't wait to see you there. Love you guys. Thanks so much. We're out. See you guys.